Every teacher once was a student, every winner once was a loser, and every expert once was a beginner. But all of them have crossed the bridge called learning. A famous quote by Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam ji. With this quote, a very good morning to one and all present here. I, Miss Mudra Singh, Assistant Professor, Amity Law School, feels immense pleasure to welcome our honorable guest speaker, Director, Amity Law School, and Chairperson of this FDP, dear faculties, and distinguished participants to this 10th technical session of the 3rd Amity National Faculty Development Program, organized by Amity Law School on the topic Fundamental Rights and Changing Dynamics of State. Today, we have our distinguished guest with us, Dr. Seema Singh, Assistant Professor, Campus Law Center, Delhi University. I welcome our Director Professor, Dr. J.P. Yadav sir, to kindly give the welcome address to ma'am. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mudra madam. Good morning to one and all. And on behalf of Amity Law School, Amity University, Lucknow campus, I would like to welcome today a guest speaker, Dr. Seema Singh, Assistant Professor, Delhi University. A hearty welcome to you, ma'am, on the third FDP inaugural session. Six day first technical session on the topic of new legal paradigm and teaching methodology. A hearty welcome to you, ma'am. Over to Mudra to carry forward this session.
Thank you, sir. Now I introduce our guest speaker for this session, Dr. Seema Singh, Assistant Professor, Campus Law Center, Delhi University. She is LLB and LLM from Lucknow University and PhD from Jamia Millia Islamia, Delhi in Forensic Science. As of today, she has presented various papers in 12 national and international conferences, published 13 articles in different law journals, and published 15 articles in different magazines and newspapers. She has also participated as resource person in more than 40 academic programs. She has kept her views as a political legal expert on different news channels in more than 50 programs on different contemporary issues. Her special areas of interest are constitutional law, administrative law, and criminal law, as well as jurisprudence. Now, I request her to enlighten us on the topic fundamental rights and changing dynamics of state. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Mudra, and thank you so much, Professor J.P. Yadav sir, for giving me this opportunity to share my idea on a very relevant topic, which is fundamental rights and dynamics of a state. And this topic is more relevant because now the definition of the state which has been provided in the constitution is not changing. But yes, obviously the dynamics of the state is going to be changed. So before moving ahead, I would like to start from this point that here my topic is basically dealing with two areas. The first one is the fundamental right, and the second one is the dynamics of the states, where basically I am going to deal with the definition of a state, which is changing what it was in the original constitution and how after the liberalization, privatization, and disinvestment, the definition of a state is shrinking. So what should be the approach of the judiciary? And if this things keeps going on, then what would be the possible consequences in the coming future? So with this, I am just going to start my lecture on this topic. Fundamental rights are basically, once if I'm going to talk about the source of the right or the source of the law or the source of the duty, then the first and the most important thing is either I'm talking about source of right, or I'm talking about source of duty, or I'm talking about source of law. So source of all these three things are nature. So first thing which a human being has learned from the nature, that how to keep aligned with the nature and follow the principles or rule of the nature. But simultaneously, by the passes of time, a concept of a state came into the existence, and subsequently the definition of the state started changing. by the passage of time. So once we deal with the fundamental right, or once we try to establish the relationship between the fundamental rights and the state, in case of Indian Constitution, Part 3 of the Indian Constitution deals with fundamental rights. And this Part 3 of the Indian Constitution, it is prescribed from Article 12 to Article 35. So here I am saying that Part 3 is going to deal with fundamental right. But firstly, in Part 3, instead of defining rights to first articles, means Article 12 and Article 13, they are dealing with basically the definition of a state and what law is, you know. So here we should try to understand that Part 3, which is basically going to deal with fundamental rights, instead of defining or talking about rights, why we are talking about states. I know many of you are aware that the basic reason is the fundamental rights are guaranteed against the state. Why I am saying that they are guaranteed against the state? Because I told in the beginning that fundamental rights are given by the nature. So these are the natural rights. No one can take away these rights. But the person who is in the power, who is in the authority, the probability are very high that they may compromise, or they may adversely affect, they may cause any kind of adverse effect to the fundamental rights of the citizens residing in a particular country. So that's why once we are talking about fundamental right in Part 3 of the Indian Constitution, firstly, instead of defining fundamental right, the term state has been defined. Because according to Part 3 of the Indian Constitution, fundamental rights are available against the state. So most important thing is to understand that who is a state. So before moving ahead, I will just try to tell you that once we talk about the definition of the state, in case of definition of a state has two aspects. One, the definition according to political science, and the second is definition according to law. So I think it is very much interesting. Once I am talking about the dynamics of a state, it is again very much important that how this concept of a state has been evolved. So a state, you know, once you are talking about the state is comparative settled territory where residents have formed association with a purpose to establish peace, law, and order. And I think this is a very simple definition. There is no problem. And in broad terms, a political organization of society is known as a state. But once we are talking about the idea of a state, or how this idea of a state has evolved, primarily we can categorize it into two parts. The first one is the idea of Western world about the state, and the second one is the idea of India about the state. So once we are talking about idea of Western world about the state, we can trace it back to the theories of Aristotle and Plato. They were defined in the form of polis or city-state. So, you know, according to their theory, small states in Greece originated from natural division. They are the state. City-state means where self-sufficient and was pursued by the means of developing morality among the individual in a particular community. So that is the definition of a state. But in the modern concept of a state, which is emerged in 16th century, the credit of using this term specifically, which is a state, the credit goes to Machiavelli. So Machiavelli firstly used the term state in his classic work, in his book. The name of the book is The Prince, and this book was published in the year 1523. So it set aside moral consideration and focused completely on the strength of the ruler. So, you know, the Machiavelli is putting a lots of emphasis upon the strength of the ruler. So how much powerful a ruler is, it depends upon the how much powerful a state is, it depends upon the strength of the ruler. Later on, once we are talking about the definition in the modern time, a state can be said to be more than a government. As we all know that what is the present situation, globally it is acceptable. As we know that government changes, but states are perpetual. States are perpetual. So a state is the mean of rule over a defined or sovereign territory with a population. It is comprised of an executive, bureaucracy, courts, and other institutions to ensure law and order in maintaining law and order. Along with that, a state also levies taxes and operates a military and police forces. it distributes and redistributes its resources. So once you are going to, once I discussed you the definition of the modern state, I think you can very well understand this definition in the contemporary circumstances. Either we are talking about India or any other country. So in this way, the modern definition of a state has been accepted. And once we are talking about the definition of a state accepted according to the international law, then it means an independent political entity occupied a defined territory, the members of which are united together for the purpose of resisting any external force and preserving internal order. So, you know, this is the definition of a state under the international law. So in this way, we have discussed the definition of a state. Now, the important thing is, as I told you earlier, that we can classify the definition of a state in two parts. The first is on the basis of Western theory, and the second one is on the basis of Indian theory. Now let's talk about what India says. You know, the definition which is given by India about the state is equally important. And the reason being, India is one of the most oldest civilization. And this is the only civilization of the world which has 5,000 years old written economic history. I'm talking about economic history. So, you know, India is a very ancient civilization, and India is a country where the theory of origin of a state was defined in ancient India through three ways. The first definition is the social contract theory. The second definition is the divine theory. And the third definition is organic or Saptanga theory. I know most of us are very much aware that how Western theorists have defined the meaning of a state, but it is more interesting to understand that how the idea of a state was defined in ancient India. So the firstly, I would like to discuss the concept of a social contract theory. So what social contract theory, I think you all are very much aware, state is a result of a contract between the king and his subjects. And this contract, this is also famously known in the form of contractarian theory. And Hobbes has also approved the same kind of theory once he's talking about the definition of a state. But now, the two other important aspects once we are talking about the definition of a state in context of India, the another theory is divine theory. You know, this divine theory is again very much important, and you can very well correlate the definition of a state which is given in the divine theory or in the organic theory with the contemporary world. The words have been changed, but still the purpose is same. So what divine theory says? Divine theory says king was subordinate to the law. This is something which is very much important, because we have also read Augustinian theory which says that law is the command of sovereign. So whatever sovereign is going to say, that is law. But what divine theory says? Divine theory says king was subordinate to law. According to Manusmriti, Lord created king to protect his creation. Lord created king to protect his creation. According to Ramayana and Mahabharata, king was the protector of divine things, and his duty was not to allow any kind of destruction to the things created by the nature. Here, I would also like to add one more thing, because this definition is quite comprehensive. Like in the present day world, once we are going to define the meaning of democracy, democracy means Prajatantra. But what is the meaning of Praja? So once you go and read the Indian philosophy, what is the meaning of Praja? Praja means not only the human beings. Praja means all living and non-living beings. Praja means all animate and inanimate objects. So, you know, these days we are talking about the Sustainable Development Goals 2030, which were adopted in 2015. So you just remember, in this divine theory, they are saying that the responsibility of the king is to preserve everything. So it is very much in line with Sustainable Development Goals. So it is not related only with the protection of the human beings, but it is equally related with the protection of the nature. And it is talking about the protection which is given by the king to all the living beings, to all the non-living beings, to all the animate as well as to all the inanimate objects. So this is the divine theory of the state. And in the present day world, if you are going to compare it, then you can very well understand that whatsoever we have adopted the same kind of role, or we are expecting the same kind of role from the state towards the nature or towards the human beings. The third theory that is again very interesting, and that theory is known as organic theory. Organic theory is very much important, and it is more comprehensive also. What organic theory says? Organic theory says state is like an organism, and each organ has a specified function to perform. Remember, this organic theory is also known as Saptang theory, and it divides a state into 7 parts. So what this theory says? This theory says that if all the 7 parts of the state are not going to work together, the state cannot perform its function properly. And this definition is very much relevant in present day, because now we believe in a system where we expect so much from the state, but we do not want to talk about our responsibility towards the society and towards the country. So, you know, once you are talking about the organic theory or the Saptang theory, this 7 component of a state are the king or the sovereign, means the king may be sovereign, the government may be sovereign, anybody whoever is the sovereign. The king or sovereign, ministers, territory and population, fortified cities or capitals, treasury, army, friend and allies. So this is the Saptang theory. So what Saptang theory of state says? Saptang theory of state says that all these 7 components should work together. They should remain aligned with each other if we actually want to achieve the purpose of welfare of all. And this is something which is, I think, which is more relevant, because we can compare the present day state not only in India, but in all the democratic countries or other countries with this 7 offshoots of this Saptang theory or organic theory, that how much efficiently all these are working. Like the very important part of this Saptang theory is territory and population. So I raised a very, I think, very relevant point, which is largely ignored either by the judiciary or by all of us, that what is the role of public in good governance. You know, once we are talking about the governance, we are only bothered about the role of the government. But what should be the role of the population in implementing the concept of good governance? So organic theory or Saptang theory is going to talk about that. So according to Mahabharata, Shukra Niti or Shukra Niti Samhita, every limb is very important for the purpose of functioning of the state. So this is the, you know, these are the different definitions which are basically dealing with that how the concept of a state was understood and evolved by the passes of time. Now let's come to part 3 of the Indian Constitution, which is talking about, which is going to be started from Article 12. Article 12, which defines a state. As I told you earlier also, that part 3 of the Indian Constitution is going to deal with fundamental rights. But instead of defining fundamental rights, firstly, we have defined what is a state. I gave you a brief idea that how the political definition of a state under the political science, how it has been defined, how it has been defined under the international law, how it has been defined under the law. But once we are talking about part 3 of the Indian Constitution, the definition of a state, which is given under Article 12, actually Article 12 is not defining what is a state, but they have given certain illustrations. And you know, and what are those illustrations? Central government and parliament, state government and state legislature, local authorities and other authorities. So this is the definition of the state. So once you are going to read Article 12 of the Indian Constitution, you can draw some inference regarding the function of sovereign, with the functions which cannot be performed by ordinary citizen. They are a sovereign function in a way. That's why we can understand the definition of a state in this way, that a state is something which is going to perform certain kind of sovereign function. But if we try to break this Article 12 into different components, then we realize that there is no problem in understanding what is central government and what is parliament. There is no problem in understanding that what is state government and state legislature. The problematic things are two other which are the part of Article 12, and that is other authorities and local authority. Now, once we are talking about local authority or other authority, we all are very much aware that there is a legislation, and the name of the legislation is General Clauses Act. And in this act, we can get different kind of definitions. So once we are going to talk about the definition of local authorities, it is given under section 3, subclause 31 of General Clauses Act 1897. And what it says, it has basically, you can say that Supreme Court in a case, the name of the case is Muhammad Yasin versus Town Area Committee 1952. The Supreme Court has elaborated the definition of this term, other authorities. So what Supreme Court is saying, what Supreme Court has pronounced in the case of Muhammad Yasin versus Town Area Committee in the year 1952, the Supreme Court has held to be characterized as a local authority. The local authority, there should be certain characteristics like have a separate legal existence or corporate body. Have a separate legal existence or corporate body, must be legally independent entity, must have a function in a definite area, wholly or partially, directly or indirectly, elected by the inhabitants of that particular area. Like, you know, we have seen the elections in Nagar Palika or the municipal corporations, enjoying certain degree of autonomy. And we all know that autonomy is vested in the local authority so that they could perform their functions properly. And for every big and small thing, they should not rush to the government. So, you know, here, while defining the meaning of other authorities, it is very much clear that the Supreme Court is saying that other authorities have some distinct powers. And these powers are vested in these other authorities to perform their functions properly. So enjoy a certain degree of autonomy, it is must for them. Be entrusted by a statute with any government. With any government. Functions and duties are usually entrusted to the local area. Locally means the duties which they are going to perform, they are going to perform these duties in a particular area like health, education, water, town planning, etc., etc. And they also have the power to raise funds for the purpose of activities and fulfillment of its objective by levying taxes, rates, charges, or fee. We all are aware that how basically MCT is going to charge taxes. So, you know, they have to bear their own expenses also. And because they have to bear their own expenses, they can collect, you know, this money or this fund, they can raise this fund through the imposition of some kind of local taxes. So, you know, now it is very much clear that once we are going to talk about the definition of other authorities, it is defined under section 3, subclause 31. An authority means you have some kind of power to make certain rules and regulation. You are working in a particular area. You have power to impose certain taxes for the creation of the wealth, and you are an autonomous body to perform certain kind of activities more efficiently. So this Nagar Palika, Panchayats, they are the example of other local authorities. Now, local authorities defined, rest of the things have been defined. Now, the next important thing, the next most important thing is what is the definition of other authorities. Now, one thing is very much important to understand that when the constitution makers were making the constitution, rest of the things which are very clearly, which could be very clearly understood, they have been kept in under Article 12 of the Indian Constitution. But why they did not define the term other authority? So because maybe they were very much sure that in the future, the state, because once we got independence, at that point of time, we are basically a police state. And after getting independence, we converted from a police state to a welfare state. So once I'm talking about the concept of the welfare state, a welfare state is going to perform different kind of functions. So once a state is going to perform different kind of functions, it is also quite possible that the state will delegate its power to some other bodies or authorities. And this was the reason that in the beginning, they kept in the constitution a term which was other authority, but which was not defined. So they left it to the wisdom of the courts to define the term other authority by the passes of time. And actually it happened. How it happened? Initially, the government, once the government started performing different kind of, welfare functions, they started creating certain statutory bodies. I cannot create a body which is statutory. You cannot create a body which is statutory. Statute is something which can be passed by the competent legislature, and through that statute you are basically going to create a authority. So what Supreme Court has said, in the beginning, the government were basically, or the parliament, they were creating certain statutory bodies. So in the case of Rajasthan State Electricity Board, in the case of International Airport Authority, in the case of Sukhdeo versus Bhagat Ram, the Supreme Court has declared different bodies which were statutory in nature as state. Like in the case of Rajasthan State Electricity Board was created through a statute. So being a statutory body, the Supreme Court has said that this is an instrumentality of the state and it is performing the function of the state. So this comes under the purview of other authority. Similarly, in the case of Sukhdeo versus Bhagat Ram, the Supreme Court has held that LIC, ONGC and Finance Corporation, they all have been created from different kind of statutes. So they are also other authorities. But in the case of International Airport Authority, for the first time in the year 1979, the Supreme Court tried to create some more clarity about the definition of other authority. And in this case, in the case of International Airport Authority, the Supreme Court has first time clearly mentioned that while deciding that whether a particular authority lies in the category of other authority under Article 12 or not, there are certain parameters, and the parameters are finance. Who is going to finance those authorities? Whether the government is going to finance them. And if the government is going to finance, then whether they are substantially financed. The second important thing is function. What kind of function they are performing? The function they are performing are the public function. And the next important thing is the control. Control or monopoly. Control or monopoly means they are under the control of the government. That is the first thing. And the second important thing is whether the monopoly has been conferred by the state. And because of the created monopoly, no other person besides the allotted entity is allowed to perform those actions. So, this finance, this control, monopoly, and the next important thing is whether the government has transferred any of its department to a particular corporation. So if you go and try to minutely observe the definition of other authority, which has been given by the Supreme Court in the case of International Airport Authority, there somehow it is roaming around the definition of rest of the component of the state. So it is very much clear if something is substantially financed by the state, under the deep and pervasive control of the state, performing public function, the monopoly is conferred by the state, or the government has transferred any of its department to a particular corporation. On the basis of the cumulative effect of all these things, remember, only one or two cannot be a sufficient criteria to decide that whether a body is a state or not. But after going through the cumulative effect, we can ascertain that whether a particular body is a state or not. So up to this point of time, things are fine. The government is going to create a statutory body, and statutory bodies are a state. But by the passage of time, what the government has started doing? Government now do not want to create a new statutory body. Why? What is the reason? Because now the concept of the welfare state is expanding. So the role of the state is also expanding. So for every big and small thing, it is not possible for the state to create a statutory body. So what the state has started doing? State has started registering some bodies under the legislation which is already existing. Like state started registering companies under the Companies Act, or the state started registering societies under the Society Registration Act. Now, what is the issue? What is the controversial part? The controversial part is even if I want to register a company, I can go and register a company under the Companies Act. If I want to register a society, I can go and register a society under the Societies Registration Act. So the same thing is going to be done by the government also, because now the government is not going to create any statutory body. What the government is doing, the government is creating a company under the registering a company under the Companies Act. The government is going to register a society under the Societies Registration Act. So what is the difference between my company and the company of the government? So by the passage of time, these issues were also raised before the Supreme Court, because it is always in the interest of the state that a particular body is not a state, but it is always in the interest of the people, or in the interested party, in the interest of the affected party, that the right or the violator of the right is a state. So in this way, by the creation of companies under the Companies Act, or the societies under the Societies Registration Act, basically we can say that the government was trying to give an impression that these bodies have nothing to do with us, and they are independent body. But by the passage of time, the Supreme Court has said that if the rest of the parameters are applicable, then it doesn't matter that these companies or these societies, they are statutory or non-statutory in nature, they are created by the government or not. The important thing is, on the basis of their finance, function, control, monopoly, and rest of the things, even if a company is registered under the Companies Act, or a society registered under the Society Act and Societies Registration Act, if it is under the deep and pervasive control of the government, if it is financed by the government, if it is performing a public function, or if the state has conferred their power in these companies or these societies, then in that circumstances, irrespective of the fact that they are the companies registered under the Companies Act or societies registered under the Societies Registration Act, they will be considered as a state. And after that, we are very much aware that there was a case of Som Prakash Rekhi, where the Supreme Court has declared that Bharat Petroleum Corporation Limited, which is a company registered under the Companies Act, that is a state. And simultaneously, the Supreme Court has also held that like Uttar Pradesh Ganna Kisan Sansthan, which is a registered society under the Societies Registration Act, that is also a state. Now the things are clear. There are certain parameters on the basis of which the state is going to be, the Supreme Court is going to identify that whether a particular body is a state or not. And then there are two more important cases. The first case is Pradeep Kumar Biswas, where the Supreme Court has decided that CSIR is a state. CSIR, remember, it is not 100% financed by the state. It is receiving 70% grants from the state. But on the basis of the rest of the parameters, the Supreme Court has held in the case of Pradeep Kumar Biswas that CSIR is a state. But one more very interesting case, because most of the time there is a question, and the question is whether NGOs are a state or not. So there is a very famous case of G. Basi Reddy versus International Crop Research Institute. And in this case, the International Crop Research Institute is an NGO. So basically, they are working in the field of research to initiate the productivity of crops, how the productivity of crops can be initiated. So they have also come to India, they have opened their office in India, and suddenly they started, they gave a notice to one of his employees, who is Mr. G. Basi Reddy, and subsequently he was kicked out. So he is talking about the protection of his fundamental right, because he is saying that his fundamental right to life has been violated, and the right of fair hearing was not provided to him. So this is in the violation of his Article 14 also. So a writ should be issued under the International Crop Research Institute. But remember, this is a very important case, because in this case of G. Basi Reddy, the Supreme Court has said that the action or the role which is going to be performed by the International Crop Research Institute, that is a self-imposed duty, and that is not state conferred. The state has just allowed them to do certain things. So do certain things, but whatever they are doing, that is not under the control of the government. They are not under the deep and pervasive control of the government. The government is not going to provide any kind of financial assistance. So even if they are performing public function, then too they are not a state. So one very important part of the judgment is, in this case, the Supreme Court has said that NGOs, who are working under the self-imposed duty. Means the state is not going to say me to perform certain things. I am doing it because I want to do it. So what Supreme Court has said, that in such type of circumstances, the NGOs are working under a self-imposed duty. So they are performing a public function. It cannot be a criteria to decide or to declare that they are a state. So now, and most of the things have been, it seems very quite settled, but there is a lots of problem with the behavior of the judiciary also, because firstly, the Supreme Court has expanded the definition of a state like anything. And then subsequently, once you read different kind of judgment, like the Supreme Court has said that NCERT is not a state. The Supreme Court has said that ICPS, in the Indian Constitutional and Parliamentary Studies, is not a state. So there is no any justified, personally, I don't believe there is no justification, because the parameters are very much similar to the rest of the bodies, which has been declared as a state by the Supreme Court. So a confusion was created that in what circumstances they are going to declare a particular body as a state, and in what circumstances they are saying that this body is not a state. But here the important thing is, the most important thing is, if a particular body is going to be declared as a state, then what kind of advantage a citizen is going to receive from them? You know, once we are talking about the protection of our fundamental right, you know, Article 32 is also part of Part 3 of the Indian Constitution, and Article 32 is also our fundamental right. So this is a right of constitutional remedies. So what Article 32 says? Article 32 says, if the state is going to violate any fundamental right, then in that circumstances, it is a duty of the Supreme Court to protect the fundamental rights of the person whose right has been violated. So, you know, if a body is a state, then you can claim certain protection. Like a state is not authorized to your fundamental right. If you are a government employment, you can claim the protection of Article 14 and 16. This is the biggest advantage once you are in a government employment. You are protected from article, your right which is given to you under Article 14 and 16 is protected. But once you are in a private employment, there is no protection to Article 14 and Article 16. So once a body is going to be declared as a state, you can claim a lots of rights. So what basically, once a body is characterized as authority under Article 12, several important and significant consequences are there. And what are those consequences? The body becomes subject to the discipline of fundamental right. As I told you that once you are a state, you are not authorized to violate the fundamental rights of others. The second important thing is the body also becomes subject to the discipline of administrative law. We have read a lots of things about the, administrative rules or administrative quasi-judicial proceedings. So once a body is going to be declared as a state, they are bound by the administrative law, but not the private bodies, right? The body becomes subject to the writ jurisdiction under Article 32. So that's why once you are going to claim any remedy under Article 32, you will have to prove two things. The first thing is the violator is a state. And the second thing is the right which has been violated, that is your fundamental right. So this is a very fundamental part of Article 32. 32 gives you immediate remedy. But the two precondition you must have to satisfy, and that is the violator is a state and the right which has been violated, that is a fundamental right. The framers, so once a body is going to be declared as a state, you are going to receive these benefits. And that's why if we are going to restrict the definition of state, then we are going to face a lots of problem. So now if I'm going to say that there is a change in the definition of the state, how basically it is going to be changed? Now, in the present day world, a confusing picture has been created. And how it has been created? Because now most of the public functions are going to be performed by the private players, So this is the era of privatization. This is the era of privatization. This is the era of public-private partnership. This is the era of disinvestment, So once you go and read the Constitution, there is fundamental rights and there are directive principle of state policy. Once we are talking about the socialism is very much mentioned in Part 4 of the Indian Constitution in the form of directive principles of state policies. So socialism is also mentioned in our Constitution. But what is the problem? The problem is we have traveled a long distance. How? In 1991, we liberalized our economy and we became the part of World Trade Organization. Remember, even earlier we were the part of the GATT. But in 1991, we opened up our economy according to the norms of World Trade Organization. So how the things have been changing? In the beginning, Nehru ji was emphasizing on heavy industrialization. Then Shastri ji is talking about Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, Jai Vigyan. Indira ji is talking about socialism or Garibi Hatao. Rajiv ji is talking about delicensing and permit and quota raj abolition. Narasimha Rao ji is talking about liberalization of economy. Atal ji is talking about Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, Jai Vigyan. Manmohan Singh ji is talking about FDI, disinvestment and public-private partnership. And then Narendra Modi ji, he is talking about disinvestment, FDIs, make in India or self-reliant India. So in a way, you just see how the policy of the government has changed in last 70 years. So in the era of globalization and liberalization, now if you want to compete with the rest of the world, you are bound to liberalize your economy. And once I am talking about the liberalization, the basic policy of WTO is free trade. So they do not want any kind of restriction. And the second thing is you are also bound to create more efficient bodies. So that slowly the government is moving, now slowly, not slowly, but fastly, the government is moving towards privatization, towards disinvestment. So privatization and disinvestment means now the functions which were early performed by the state, now they are going to be performed by the private players. So state is now want to play the role of regulators only. So in the welfare state, whether this is a supply of electricity or it is any other welfare function, either it is telephone or the erection of a building or erection of a making of these airports, all these things are going to be done by the private players. So the important or the biggest challenge in this case is if the state is absolving itself from its responsibilities and going to play the role of only provider, then what is the utility of Article 32? Because if most of the sectors are privatized, there is a disinvestment where the government share is constitutionally diminishing. Then in that circumstances, if these private players are violating my fundamental right, then no remedy is available to me under Article 32. And why no remedy is available? No remedy is available because 32 says that the violator should be state. And these private party, they are not covered, in the definition of a state according to the existing parameters. So the important issue is if gradually the government is moving towards privatization, then what would be the utility of Part 3 of the Indian Constitution when corresponding remedy is not available under Article 32? And I think you can very well understand my point about which I wanted to talk. But here I also wanted to discuss some very important judgments. And I think with the help of those judgments, we will be able to understand the things in a better way. The first example or the first important judgment is the judgment of Zee Telefilms. So I am very much sure that most of you are aware about the judgment of Zee Telefilm. The judgment of Zee Telefilm is basically related with whether BCCI, we all are aware about the BCCI. BCCI is the world's largest cricket board, richest, not largest, but richest cricket board. And they have a monopoly over cricket. We know that the team is which BCCI is going to pick, that is known as Team India. But in the case of Zee Telefilm, the Supreme Court has said that BCCI is not a state, because we all are aware that BCCI is a registered society under the Societies Registration Act. So remember, as per record, it is a non-profit making society because it is a registered society under the Societies Registration Act. Basically, they are earning huge amount of money by selling the telecasting rights and through the advertisement. And this huge amount of money BCCI is going to spend in the development of cricket and in the training of the cricketers, and most of you may be aware that BCCI is not paying any tax to the government of India. So the entire income of BCCI is tax free. And the second important thing is the government is going to allot huge land pieces to BCCI to develop that area as stadiums. So it is not like that BCCI is not going to receive any kind of benefit from the state. And we all are very much aware that in BCCI earlier, most of the members of BCCI were the influential politicians. So BCCI was a place which was dominated by the politicians. But in the case of this Zee Telefilm, the Supreme Court has held that BCCI is not a state. Okay, it's fine. But there is another important thing which is very significant, and that is another case of which is related with BCCI, and the name of the case is BCCI versus Cricket Association of Bihar. We all are very much aware about the match fixing case, and match fixing was a very highlighted case. And in this case, the Supreme Court has constituted a committee under the chairmanship of Justice Lodha to give certain recommendation that how the BCCI should improve its functioning. Now, there is a very important thing which should be noted by all of us, and that particular important thing is, if BCCI is a registered society and it is not a state, then why Supreme Court is going to take so much of interest in BCCI that they have constituted a committee to look after that how by BCCI should work. And remember, in this case, BCCI versus Cricket Association, the Supreme Court has opined that BCCI should be declared as a state. But ideally, in this case, the Supreme Court has not declared BCCI as a state. So, BCCI is not a state. It has not been declared as a state for the second time in the case of BCCI versus Cricket Association of Bihar. Lekin yahan pe one more important thing is very important, and it says that 275th report of Law Commission has asked the Government of India to treat BCCI as agency under Article 12. So this is something which is a very latest development, and I think it is a very important point where in 275th report, Law Commission is going to recommend that BCCI should be considered as an agency or instrumentality of a state under Article 12. It means ideally it should be considered as a state. Now you see, in the definition there is no change, but how the interpretation is going to be changed? Still BCCI is not a state, but there is a new development. And what is the new development? One RTI has been filed, and somehow that RTI has reached to CIC, Chief Information Commissioner. The name of the case is Srimati Geeta Rani versus CPIO, Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports. Now, this is a very important development. And the important development is, in the case of Geeta Rani versus CPIO, Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports, it was decided by Chief Information Commissioner that BCCI is a public authority under Right to Information Act. This is something, because you all are aware about Right to Information Act. Right to Information Act is applicable only on public authorities. If you are going to read the definition of public authority under Right to Information Act, then the definition of a state is largely covered under the public authority, which is defined under Right to Information Act. But yes, under Right to Information Act, the definition of public authority is little bit broader in comparison to the definition of a state, which is given under Article 12. But once an authority has been declared as a public authority, directly it comes under the purview of High Court under Article 226. So there is something to enjoy, to celebrate, and that is, at least it has been declared that BCCI is a public authority. Now, the second important thing is very debatable and very controversial issue, and that is basically related with what is the status of judiciary, whether judiciary is a state or not. So remember, there are several cases, and in the case of Naresh versus the state of Maharashtra, it was held by the Supreme Court that we are not a state. In the case of Paramatman Sharan versus Chief Justice of India, again it was held that we are not a state, and same thing happened in the case of Rupa Ashokpura versus Ashokpura. This is again something which is very, very relevant, because the judiciary, once you are going to apply the parameters of a state over the judiciary, it seems that judiciary should ideally be a state. But what judiciary has said in its different judgments, the judiciary is going to say that once we are going to perform judicial function, we are not a state. We are a state only in that circumstances when we are performing administrative function. So the important question is whether the Supreme Court cannot violate your fundamental right, or the courts cannot violate your fundamental right. Or the second important thing, if they are violating your fundamental right, then whether any remedy is available to us or not. So judiciary is saying we are not a state, though they are funded by a state. They are appointed by the government. In a way, they can be removed by the parliament only. They are financially assisting, receiving financial assistance from the government, and they are performing public function. But they are not a state once they are performing the judicial function. So the important question is, once the judiciary, if you remember, a few months back, there was a case. A minor girl was harassed by a person, and a High Court Justice of Maharashtra, she disclosed the identity of that minor girl. And we all know that the identity of minor girl who is a victim of sexual offense cannot be disclosed. So whether in this type of cases, any remedy is available to that minor girl? Ideally, no. But there is a violation of her fundamental right? Obviously, yes. The second important thing, the second important example which we can give, there was a judgment of the Supreme Court, and what is the case? It is also a very highlighted case. The case is from Varanasi. Shia logon ka ek kabristan hai, and Sunnis are claiming over that kabristan. Government, Supreme Court gives order to the local administration that this graveyard belongs to Shia. तो जो सुन्नियों की कब्र है वहां पे, उसको वहां से हटाया जाए. Now, when the administration decided to implement this order of the Supreme Court, they realized that the writing between Shia and Sunni is quite possible. So they said it is not possible. Then the Supreme Court is saying that why the contempt proceeding should not be initiated against you. Then the magistrate, which is a lady magistrate, she was called by the chief minister, and she was asked why she is not implementing the order of the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court can initiate contempt proceeding against her, against the administration. She said, I am ready to face the contempt proceeding, but in this circumstances, I cannot implement the order of the judiciary because this is going to kill several people. Then ultimately, the Supreme Court, she appeared before the Supreme Court, and she said that the execution of this order is not possible. Suppose if they are going to execute such order and hundreds of people are going to die in the communal clashes, then whether the judiciary will take the responsibility of this. Or the very recent case, as I was just reading in early morning in the newspaper, that the Delhi government has said raised the demand 4 times than the required one. And if you remember, during that pandemic period, the second wave, the matter was brought before the High Court, and the central government has said that we are distributing oxygen on the recommendation of an expert committee. But again and again, High Court directed central government to fulfill the demand of the Delhi government. Now, it is very much clear that it was 4 times higher than the requirement. It means definitely the need of some states have been compromised. So if the patients have died in those states, then whether the High Court will take responsibility of this? Obviously, no. But whether there is no violation of the fundamental right of the people? Obviously, yes. But yes, once we are going through the judgments of the Supreme Court, it is very much clear that the Supreme Court has said that we are a state only in that circumstances when we are performing any kind of administrative function, like conducting examination for judicial services or initiating or doing any other kind of recruitment process. Third very important case which I want to just discuss to all of you is the case of Subhash Chandra Agarwal. It is a very highlighted case, and it is a very interesting case also. In 1997, a resolution was passed by the judges across the country and in an international jurist meet. And they said that the judges should disclose their property. This is an unprecedented case. That's why I thought I should mention this case here. So what has happened here in this case? In this case, they have said that they will disclose their assets. And it was also decided by all the judges that the judges of the High Court and the judges of the Supreme Court, they will disclose their property to the Chief Justice of India. So what has happened in this case? Mr. Subhash Chandra Agarwal, who is a RTI activist, he filed a RTI to the Chief Justice of India's office, and he said that kindly provide me the copy of the disclosure of the asset which was made to the CJI office. In response, he received one thing, and the response says that the office of CJI is not covered under Right to Information Act. Remember, many of you can think that why continuously I'm talking about Right to Information Act. Remember, I am talking continuously about the right to information, because once a body comes under the purview of right to information, it means it is a public authority. And if it is a public authority, the remedy, if you cannot get under Article 32, the probabilities of acceptance of your writ under Article 226 becomes quite high. And we all are aware that the writ issuing power of the Supreme Court and the High Court is same. So why I'm going to deal with all these things, I'm going to discuss all these things, because even if the definition of the state is not changing, how the interpretation is going to be changed. So here in this case, one very important issue was raised by the Supreme Court. That's why I am discussing this case. In this case, when Mr. Subhash Chandra Agarwal filed the RTI, in response, he received that this information cannot be provided. He approached to CIC office, and CIC ordered in the favor of Mr. Subhash Chandra Agarwal and said that the office of CJI is a public authority, so it comes under the purview of Right to Information Act. Now, the CPIO office of Chief Justice of India does not want to provide this information. So this is an unprecedented case in this way, that the office of CJI became an appellant before the Delhi High Court. So Supreme Court is approaching High Court to declare that the office of CJI is not a public authority. And in this case, single judge bench of Delhi High Court declared that CJI office is a public authority. Now, if the CJI office is a public authority, CJI office comes under the purview of Right to Information Act. So in this case, CPIO of Supreme Court filed an appeal before the Supreme Court on this, with this request that the office of Supreme Court is not a public authority, so the information cannot be disclosed. So what is so unique about this case? Supreme Court is the appellant before the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court is going to decide the matter also. So this case remained pending for quite a long time, and ultimately it was decided just before the retirement of Justice Gogoi. And he said that yes, the office of the Chief Justice of India is a public authority and it comes under the purview of Right to Information Act. But here one very important thing is there, which basically I wanted to highlight. Here Supreme Court held that, please listen me very carefully. Finally, Supreme Court held that office of CJI is a public office and comes under the Right to Information Act. Supreme Court also clarified that information not presently available or held by a public authority, but which can be accessed. Most of us are not aware about this thing. This is provided under the Right to Information Act also. The information which is presently not available, held by the public authority, but which can be accessed by the public authority from a private body under any other law for the time being in force is also a public information. Thus, all private organizations comes under the ambit of Right to Information Act if the information can be accessed by any public authority. So remember, even a private school or a private university, they are receiving some limited grant from the government, then in that circumstances, they are also covered under the Right to Information Act. So, you know, in this way, the Supreme Court has tried to give an expansion to the meaning of public authority, and they said that how the private authorities whose information can be accessed by the public authorities is also public bodies is also a public authority or other authority. Lakshmi. is also a public authority or other authority. Now, let's come to the next case. Next case, which is very important, and the name of the case is, because you know lots of issues have been raised regarding two things, and that is the status of online platform. Whether we are talking about the Twitter, or we are talking about the WhatsApp, or we are talking about the Facebook. So yeah, lots of ruckus is going on between the government and this social media platform. So there is a very famous case of Karmanya Singh. Now, you know, we all are aware that we all are using technology. So these online platforms are having a lots of information about us. They have so much of our personal information. So what is the important thing? Whether WhatsApp is covered, WhatsApp or Facebook or any other social media platform is a public authority. So one of a very important judgment is the case of Karmanya Singh. Karmanya Singh Sareen versus Union of India. And in the case of Karmanya Singh Sareen versus Union of India, Karmanya Singh has filed a petition against WhatsApp. And what is the ground of the petition? The ground of the petition is WhatsApp is collecting a lots of private information and they are misusing it. But what is the argument of WhatsApp? The argument of WhatsApp is this writ petition is not maintainable. And why it is not maintainable? It is not maintainable because WhatsApp is not a state. So remember, WhatsApp is a social media platform. Obviously, they are having a lots of information about us. But here in the case of Karmanya Singh Sareen, Delhi High Court has held that yes, WhatsApp is not a state. So the writ petition is not maintainable. Remember, WhatsApp is having data of millions of Indians. How they are going to use the data, nobody knows. But in this case, it was decided that WhatsApp is not a state. So writ petition under Article 226 is not maintainable. Though High Court granted some limited relief to the petitioner. Now let's come to the another case, and that is my case. In my case, I have filed a fresh petition against the WhatsApp, against their new policy where they are basically going to violate the right to privacy of the citizens. Here again, WhatsApp is raising a point, and the point is that we are not a state, we are not other authority. So this writ petition is not maintainable. So how basically, in my case, Delhi High Court has issued notice. How Supreme Court has issued notice in the case of Facebook, in the case of OTT platform. These all things have happened. So remember, one of the way is the first party is the government of India, and the second party is for WhatsApp, Facebook, or any other social media platform, because this is the primary responsibility of the state to protect my privacy. In the case of Karmanya Singh Sareen, right to privacy was not a fundamental right. But once I filed my petition, Puttaswamy judgment is already there. And what Puttaswamy judgment said? Puttaswamy judgment says that right to privacy is a fundamental right. So if my privacy is going to be breached by a platform, what government is doing? It is the responsibility of the state to protect my privacy. So in these two cases, you see, because the responsibility belongs to the state, I made first party to the government of India that what you are doing to protect my privacy. And now this is the responsibility of the government of India to ask from WhatsApp that what they are doing to protect the privacy of the people. So, you know, in this way, basically we can say that now the definition of the state is going to be expanded. Now, even if it is not going to be expanded, then how through changes in the interpretation, we are basically trying to give effect to the relevance of Part 3 of the Indian Constitution. One very important case I will also like to discuss, and then in few minutes I will conclude, because I think there is a round for question and answer session also. And that very important case is Janet Jaipal versus SRM University. SRM University is a private university. It is a private deemed university where appellant is a lecturer. So what has happened? She received a notice of removal. To challenge this notice, she filed a writ petition before the court. But what is the argument of SRM University? The argument of the SRM University is this writ petition is not maintainable because SRM University is not a state. Remember, these things are financial activities primarily performed by private banks. Educational activities primarily performed by private universities. health sector, many private hospitals are working. So they all are performing public function. So whether they don't have any responsibility towards the fundamental rights of the citizen. So in this case, the argument of SRM University is no, we are not a state. So this writ petition is not maintainable. But when the matter was brought before the Supreme Court has done one thing. They have appointed Mr. Harish Salve as amicus curiae to decide the maintainability of this writ petition. And Mr. Harish Salve, what he is suggesting, Mr. Harish Salve is suggesting that when a private body exercises its public function, even if it is not a state, remember, even if it is not a state, so it is not necessary that the violator should be state, even if it is not a state, the aggrieved party has remedy not only under ordinary law, but also under the Constitution under Article 226. So it means writ can be filed before the High Court under Article 226 in the case of private universities or against any private body which is performing any kind of public function. Like very recently, Calcutta High Court has passed the order, and in that order, Calcutta High Court has said that private banks, RBI is a state, but private banks, they all are public authorities. So they all are under the purview of the writ jurisdiction. So, you know, in this way, we have seen that how basically the definition of a state is not changing, has not changed ideally in the Constitution, but the interpretation is changing. The government is constantly moving in the direction of privatization. So it is very much important to protect the fundamental rights of the citizen. But as of now, what we have seen, there is no expansion of definition under Article 12. But yes, they are improving or enhancing the definition of public authority. So whoever is performing a public function, they are, if they are a public authority under the Right to Information Act, then in that circumstances, they are public authority. If they are performing public function in which a larger public interest is involved, like education, like hospitals, like banking sector, then too they are public authorities and they comes under the purview of Article 226. But the issue is, what about Article 12? Still, there is no proper clarification that Supreme Court is intended to further expand the definition of other authorities. But I just wanted to bring one very important point to the notice to all of you. When Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the Prime Minister of India, he appointed a commission under the chairmanship of Justice Venkat Chalaiya in February 2000 to review the working of Constitution. Remember here, Justice Venkat Chalaiya has recommended something which is very relevant. And what he is saying, the committee is suggesting there should be an addition under Article 12 in the form of explanation. So what he is saying that following explanation should be added in Article 12. And what is that explanation? In this article, the expression other authorities shall include any person in relation to such of its function which are of public nature. So this Venkat Chalaiya Commission recommendation, which was given in the year 2000, that is very relevant because especially the committee has recommended that it is high time to further add something in Article 12 in the form of the explanation, which says that all those who are performing public function, they should be considered as other authorities. So obviously, there are few challenges. The Constitution is still the same. No change in the definition of Article 12, but I just try to discuss that how the Supreme Court is trying to protect the fundamental rights through the judicial pronouncements, and how the purview of RTI is going to be expanded, and how the purview of this public authority is going to be expanded. So from my side, this is all about. And now if any of you want to ask any question, then you can ask. I think, what is the time? How much time?
Thank you, Dr. Seema Singh. Thank you very much. Your presentations was very lucid and full of academic content related to Article 12 and 13. You beautifully covered all the dimensions of Article 12, and you started from the beginning, even in the ancient period, and then you also gave the latest trend about the Article 12 and things. So really, it was wonderful, and I'm sure that all the delegates and all the participants feel enriched after your deliberation. Thank you very much. And now I request to Dr. Mudra Singh to take over the question answer session. Over to Dr. Mudra.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for such an enlightening session. And I hope and I'm very confident that all the dignitaries have learned a lot and they will enhance their knowledge. Now I move ahead towards the question answer round. Participants, if you have any questions, okay. Ma'am, I would like to ask, there are two questions from my side. I would like to ask that what the role of state when during the second wave of COVID-19, when there was no beds and there was a pathetic situation in the hospitals. So when people were, what about the protection of the fundamental rights in this last second phase when of COVID-19? And secondly, what should be the changing dynamics of state in this regard to protect and ensure that fundamental protection of the fundamental rights of the citizens if there is any third layer of COVID-19? How the state is going to be how state is going to play the role, as you have very well elaborately explained to us. So these two questions from my side, I would request you to please.
Thank you, Mudra. Thank you so much. And you know, this pandemic situation, this was something which was unprecedented. And suppose in India, we are very much aware that the health sector is not very good. Health facilities are not very good in India. And one of the very important reason is we have a huge population. But because the COVID situation is unprecedented, we have seen that even those countries which have the world-class health infrastructure, either it is Italy or it is America or any other European countries, their health system also crumbled like anything, you know. So the important issue in the case of management or managing the COVID situation in India is it was something which was not easy. You know, suddenly you are not aware, because in the first phase there was nothing like that, there is a rampant demand of oxygen, and suddenly within a week there is a surge in COVID cases. Now the government is trying. Definitely there is some mistake on the part of the state, and the mistake is in the meantime period was not properly utilized, because everybody believed that now the COVID is not going to come back. But there was some negligence on the part of the state, because at that point of time already second wave has already affected the European and American countries. So the probability of second wave in India could not be denied. But yes, the COVID condition which was faced by Indian, I don't think that it could be perfectly managed by any government. Then too, I will say that if we compare the casualties with the rest of the countries, the casualties are comparatively less. But here one thing is very important which I want to mention, and I mentioned in the beginning of my lecture also. As a citizen, did we perform our duties? I have seen, even now you see the second surge is over and people dropped down their masks. So we are challenging COVID to infect us. So if the people are becoming so much negligent in such a densely populated country, we cannot blame for everything for the state, because this is beyond the physical capacity of the state. We cannot, suppose there is a demand of 40 crore beds. They cannot be created, not by any India, but not by any country. So as a citizen, we should also take a power responsibility. That's why when I was discussing the Saptang theory, I said that population is a very important component of state and governance. But what is the problem in the present day democratic countries? As a citizen, we do not want to owe any responsibility. And there is a very interesting thing which definitely I want to discuss. Once the Mahabharata is over and Bhishma Pitama was lying on deathbed, Yudhishthira, and I think that should be read by each and every law teacher and law student, that particular portion in which Bhishma Pitama is preaching about political science to Yudhishthira. And there he has quoted one thing. What he is saying, there was a time in India जब न राजा था, न प्रजा थी, न राज्य था, न दंड था, न दंड नीति थी, और लोग अपनी ड्यूटीज का पालन किया करते थे. You know, so laws are made for whom? Those who are the violators. If we are implementing our duties, if we are performing our duties, then not only we will be able to save ourselves, but we will also be able to save the rights of others. But post independence, suddenly we adopted a system where we started believing that everything should be done by the state. That's why once you read Rabindranath Tagore, he is opposing Vinoba Bhave, he is opposing this model of a state. Why they are opposing? Because remember, in India, the concept of society and the social governance was very strong. The people never used to call to government to perform all big and small thing. वो खुद करते थे. But now, what is the problem? अगर मेरे यहाँ पे बगल में कूड़ा भी पड़ा है तो मैं कूड़ा डालूंगी, मैं उसको साफ नहीं करूंगी. So for everything we started relying upon the state, and state cannot manage this much of things. So as a citizen, we should also take the responsibility, and that's why Rabindranath Tagore is saying that if the state is going to take all sorts of responsibility, then the people are not going to perform their duty. That's why once you read the concept of the governance, in the concept of the governance, the social governance is very much important. And social governance means what is the role of the society in implementing the concept of the governance. So in any exceptional circumstances like COVID, the responsibility of the society increases manyfold. At least we can use our mask, because now another variant is there and that is more infectious. So if we are not going to take the proper, we have seen that the people are not ready for vaccination. Government is giving them so much kind of lucrative offers कि आप जाके लगा लो, घर घर तक जा रहे हैं तब भी लोग नहीं लगा रहे हैं. So what government has also a limitation. So as a citizen, how much we are vigilant. So governance is something which is not a unidirectional thing, but it is a bi-directional. The government should do something for the people, and people should also do something for the governance. So I will only suggest for your answer that for the surge of the third wave, whatever government is doing, that is fine, because they have said something that we are prepared. But then too, we should not rely absolutely upon the government. The first and the most important thing is we should go for vaccination, and we should follow the instructions which has been given by the government, especially using masks and maintaining social distancing. So that is my answer to your question, Mudra.
Thank you, ma'am. Another question we have: whether the federal government system is diminishing during the present era, special reference to removal of Article 370 and role of judiciary.
370 has nothing to do with the federal structure. 370 is a very debatable topic. If one day you invite me, I would like to take a complete one lecture over 370. But if you read the language of 370, it is very much clear that 370, the beginning line says that 370 is a temporary provision. That is the first thing. The second important thing is what mistakes we make when we read the Constitution. Remember, once you are going to read and interpret the Constitution, it cannot be read and understood in pieces. That you are going to read 370 separately to rest of the provisions. 370 should, the definition or the interpretation of 370 should be aligned with the preamble of the Indian Constitution. And once we are talking about Article 370, we should also talk that how this Article 370 was created. Maybe many of you are aware or not aware, the Constitution of Jammu and Kashmir came into the existence much later to the Constitution of India. So the Constitution of India is already there, which is talking about a sovereign country, which is talking about a democratic country, how you can give so much liberty to a particular state, which is not given to any other state. So there may be some political reason, and it is not like that if a mistake has been made at one point of time, that mistake should be continued for unlimited time period. How it is possible that citizen of Jammu and Kashmir is the citizen of India, but citizen of India is not a citizen of Jammu and Kashmir? Is it possible? The citizen of Jammu and Kashmir can visit any place in India, but he can settle at any place in India, but the citizen of India cannot settle in any place of Jammu and Kashmir. So, there is a lots of contradiction. Another important thing is, at the time of the division of country, the millions of people who came from Pakistan to Jammu and Kashmir is still they are striving for the citizenship. The citizenship has not been granted to them, and still they are living like refugees. But you are giving, citizenship to other person who do not deserve for that. So 370 is a very political topic. It is not that much legal topic. And I will personally suggest that 370 has nothing to do with the federal structure of the Indian Constitution. It is altogether a separate provision. To check the federal structure, there are several other provisions. So 370 was a temporary provision. And as per my understanding, that was not in the interest of the unity and integrity of the country. So it is good if it has been removed. And it is constitutionally valid also, because the starting line says that it is a temporary provision. So how a temporary provision can be made a permanent provision?
Another question we have is, what is the role of state in protection of citizens in regard to the agitations when during the farmers bill protest? Because how the state can balance at the same time, because a lot of agitation against the farmers bill was. So ma'am, what do you suggest regard to the role of state in the changing dimension?
You know, protection is a right of protest is the right of citizen. That is a part of the freedom of speech and expression. But I just remind the last speech of Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar ji, and he said something which is very relevant, and I think that should be read by each and every academician and the student of law. What he is saying, the first thing he has said, he is talking about three things, and all the three things are very relevant. He said that whatever systems we are going to adopt, that is good or bad, it depends that how it is going to be used by those who are politically authorized to use this power. That is the first thing. The second thing he is saying, you know, he is foreseeing the future of India, and you just see the level of that person, what he is saying. He is saying that in the future, if in India, so many regional political parties comes into the existence, and once they start compromising their, once they start keeping their political interest over the national interest, then it will be very difficult to keep this country intact for a longer time period. And the third thing which was said by Dr. Ambedkar is, you have a right to protest. But remember, if you have any kind of resentment with anything, then firstly exercise the mechanism which is provided in the Constitution. He has very clearly mentioned that Satyagrah, Savinay Avagya, these are not fit case for an independent sovereign country. So if the remedies are available, then firstly exercise the remedies. In the present day, last few years, what trend we have seen, suppose the government has passed a legislation and I am dissatisfied. The matter has been brought before the court. You are saying, nahi, aap isko wapas lo, hum Supreme Court ko mante hi nahi hai. So, you know, in this way, the system cannot work. And it can create a big challenge to the definition of democracy and the freedom of speech and expression, not only in case of India, but in the case of entire world. We have seen the example of United States of America also, that what happened in White House when Mr. Donald Trump was the president of India. Is it democracy? Is it a way of freedom of speech and expression? And very recently, we have seen that in the Western countries, when the governments imposed lockdown, the people of the citizens of the country are saying, my life, my right. If I do not want to use mask, you cannot force me. Okay, I'm not bothered about you. If you do not use to mask, you don't use, but you have no right to spread infection among others. So, you know, we are so much concerned about rights, and this is a very threatful situation because, you know, we are developing, and I also give credit to Supreme Courts. The problem is, what is the problem? We are converting from a a society which believes in collective interest to a society which believes in individual interest. So in the case of protest also, we have seen that it begins from Shaheen Bagh. Supreme Court in its judgment passed an order that you cannot block roads. So you just go at the designated places and you give dharna and whatever you want to do. But kya wo log uthe? The same thing has happened in the case of farmers movement also. You may be agreement, you may be disagreement with the policies of the government, but the disagreement should be properly addressed. You are saying, I do not believe in government, I do not believe in Supreme Court. Then the important issue is, who will solve the issue? Are you going to solve the issue on the streets? And if this is going to be the process, where will be the future of India tomorrow, because any law cannot just satisfy 100% of the population. So in 135 crore population, even if 2 crore people are dissatisfied, they have capacity to destroy a whole nation. We are going to settle a principle which is very, very, I think, very unfortunate. And if it keeps going on, we have seen what happened on 26th January, and today again 26th June. I haven't seen what has happened till now, but this is a very dangerous precedent. If you have any kind of dissatisfaction, you come up with the better ideas, you try to resolve the issue with the consultation. And if you don't have faith in the government, why you are not moving to the court? Very recently, I have given you the example of Delhi High Court. Delhi High Court, the central government is saying that we have created a committee of experts, and on the basis of their recommendation, we are allocating oxygen. High Court is continuously forcing central government to give more and more and oxygen to Delhi. And what has happened ultimately? Have you read today's newspaper? That how many states are going to be affected because of these decisions? So whether the High Court is going to take the responsibility. So the problem of the entire system is there is a lots of trust deficit. And trust deficit is not a good sign for a healthy democracy. And biggest credit goes to media, as per my understanding. And obviously there is a gap. Once I'm talking about the social governance, this is missing. So once the governments are going to take very important decision, there should be at least some consultation with the stakeholders. But this way of protest, this is not healthy for any democracy, and it can set very dangerous precedent for the future actions. So in any ways, I personally believe that it should be discouraged, because it can break the country into several pieces.
Thank you, ma'am, for your words of wisdom and such an enlightening session. Ma'am has enlightened us on importance of Article 12 in Part 3 of the Indian Constitution. She has very widely explained the theories of Aristotle and Plato and Machiavelli also. Definition of state in the contemporary phase. She has also emphasized on the classification of definition of state in perspective of Indian theories and Western theories, that is divine theory, social contract theory, organic theory. Ma'am has also given a comprehensive understanding of the word other authority with the help of landmark cases like Pradeep Kumar Vishwas and others, and whether different bodies as a part of state or not. She has also given the different views of political leaders about and their policy of in last 70 years how to liberalize the economy. Ma'am has also given a landmark cases relating whether an organization is a state or not, and she has updated us, enlightened us with many landmark cases like Karmanya Singh case and Puttaswamy case. I hope this session is very enlightening, and all the participants and all the dignitaries present here would learn a lot and with a great achievement from today's session, and which will add an intellect to their knowledge.
Thank you so much.
Now, thank you so much, ma'am. We are privileged to have you here. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Akshita Srivastava, Faculty of Law, Amity Law School, to deliver the vote of thanks. Over to Akshita, ma'am.
Thank you, Mudra ma'am. I, Dr. Akshita Srivastava, Assistant Professor, Amity Law School, Amity University, Lucknow, would like to thank our guest speaker, Dr. Seema Singh, Assistant Professor, Campus Law Center, Delhi University, who, despite her busy schedule, has found time and enlightened us with such a knowledgeable and informative session. Furthermore, my heartfelt thanks to our director, Professor Dr. J.P. Yadav, for his guidance to organize this event. I would also thank Dr. Tapan Kumar Chandola and Ms. Josna Singh, who is a faculty convener of the event, for their cooperation and support.